Hello everyone, welcome to the Mr. Bean Family Story Channel. This is where every day we bring you interesting, fun, and inspiring stories from the Mr. Bean family. You'll meet me, Mr. Bean, someone you're probably already familiar with, and I hope you love my son with his surprising and meaningful stories, and my lovely daughter, who always brings positive energy with stories that are close to life. Each day, one of us will share new stories, exciting journeys, and today is my turn. I'll take you on a fun adventure, but also with deep life lessons. Today's story carries a simple yet important message. Never judge something by its appearance. Behind that appearance, there are always surprising things waiting for us. If you enjoy the lively atmosphere of our family, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our stories on this amazing journey. Share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones, and don't forget to leave your fun comments so I know what you think. Now let's dive into today's story and immerse ourselves in a world full of surprises. Let's go! The Hawthorne Ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off the polished marble floors. It was Boston's most exclusive charity gala, a gathering of the city's most influential figures, wealthy, powerful, and dressed to impress. Women draped in designer gowns, diamonds catching every glint of light, glided through the crowd with practiced grace, while men in perfectly tailored tuxedos exchanged business cards disguised as small talk. The event was held to raise funds for a new wing at Boston Children's Hospital, a cause that seemed almost secondary to the prestige of attending. Catherine Winters, the chairwoman of the hospital's fundraising committee, adjusted her sapphire necklace. The deep blue stones matched her elegant gown, a perfect reflection of her impeccable taste and position in Boston's high society. Beside her, Eleanor Madison smoothed the fabric of her black designer dress, the silken material shimmering as she moved. Patricia Reynolds, ever the socialite, smiled brightly in her navy blue ensemble with silver accents, her eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. "It's about time we had some real donors," Catherine remarked with a glance at the attendees around them. "Last year's group wasn't nearly as established as they should have been." Eleanor and Patricia nodded in agreement, their eyes scanning the room in search of potential new contributors. The air was thick with whispers of judgment, as the women assessed their fellow guests with the sharp precision of seasoned socialites. Then the entrance of a newcomer caught their attention, Emma Sullivan. She stepped into the ballroom, her presence immediately noticeable, but not in the way the others would expect. Unlike the sea of luxury and ostentation, Emma wore a simple beige dress, the fabric plain and unadorned. She stood out, not because of her beauty or elegance, but because she looked so painfully ordinary amid the opulence. The whispers started almost immediately. Patricia leaned in, barely lowering her voice. "Who invited her?" she murmured, her eyes scanning Emma from head to toe. "She looks like she's here for a job interview, not a $5,000 a plate charity event." Emma, undeterred by the quiet gossip, moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence. Her simple beige dress, unadorned by jewelry or any designer labels, didn't seem to bother her. At 34, Emma carried herself with a natural grace, one that didn't rely on outward adornment to be noticed. She paused to admire the architectural renderings of the new pediatric oncology wing, the focus of tonight's fundraising efforts. Her eyes lingered on the intricate details that others might have overlooked. What no one in the room knew was that just hours earlier, Emma had toured the hospital's pediatric ward, meeting children who had come to trust her as a silent advocate. She had promised a young girl battling leukemia that the new wing would have windows overlooking a butterfly garden, a place where the child could find peace during her treatments. Emma knew that promise would be kept. A cultured voice interrupted her thoughts. "I don't believe we've met," it said smoothly, pulling Emma back into the present. She turned to see Catherine Winters standing beside her, her hand outstretched, adorned with a diamond bracelet that caught the light as it glinted. Catherine Winters, hospital board, fundraising chair. Emma smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Emma Sullivan, it's a pleasure to meet you." Catherine's gaze flickered briefly to Emma's attire, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the absence of designer labels. "What brings you to our little gathering tonight?" Catherine asked, her tone polite but tinged with curiosity. Emma simply replied, "I'm passionate about children's health care." The women circled around Emma like elegant sharks, their eyes scanning her with a mix of curiosity and quiet judgment. Eleanor, champagne flute in hand, took a delicate sip before speaking. "We don't often see new faces at these events," she said, her tone light, but with an edge of thinly veiled disdain. "The Hawthorne Gala is usually quite exclusive." Emma nodded, her expression unchanged. She'd been invited because of her passion for children's health care, not because she fit into their world of exclusivity and wealth. But she didn't feel the need to explain that to them. "The invitation mentioned the pediatric oncology wing," she said simply. "It's a cause that's close to my heart." Patricia, never one to miss a chance to make a pointed remark, exchanged a glance with Catherine before speaking. "Every small contribution helps, I suppose," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though tonight's donors are mostly in the 6- and 7-figure range, it adds up." Emma's calm response caught them off guard. "I agree," she said evenly, her voice soft but steady. "Every contribution matters." Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. There was something about Emma's quiet confidence that unsettled her. "Your dress," she began, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Is it vintage?" The question hung in the air, its true meaning clear. Emma didn't flinch. "Just simple," she replied with a gentle smile. "I find elaborate designs distracting." Eleanor barely concealed a smirk behind her champagne glass, while Catherine's tone turned condescending. "How practical," she remarked, making the word sound like an insult. "We must introduce you to Montgomery Wells. He's our biggest donor from last year, $5 million for the emergency department. Monty loves meeting everyday people." Emma's eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom. "I'd enjoy that." Catherine, eager to steer Emma into a conversation with Montgomery, signaled to the rest of her circle, rolling her eyes subtly as she did so, as if to silently express her amusement. As Emma followed Catherine through the crowd, whispers trailed behind them like a soft but cutting murmur. "Who brought the secretary?" one woman whispered. "Is that dress from a department store? Poor thing." Emma moved through the whispers with quiet grace, unbothered by the judgment that seemed to follow her every step. She knew her worth wasn't defined by what she wore. As they neared Montgomery Wells, the hospital's largest donor, Dr. James Harris, the chief of pediatrics, approached them with a warm smile. His eyes lit up when he saw Emma. "Miss Sullivan, I didn't know you'd be here tonight." Catherine's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You two know each other?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity and a hint of skepticism. Before Emma could answer, Dr. Harris continued enthusiastically. "Miss Sullivan visited our pediatric ward this morning and spent hours with the children. Little Sophie hasn't stopped talking about the butterfly garden you promised her." Catherine's smile tightened, forced and polite. "How charitable," she said, her voice dripping with faux admiration. "But Miss Sullivan, we were just about to join Montgomery Wells for a quick chat about his donation. Perhaps you could meet him afterward." "Monty's currently tied up with the mayor," Dr. Harris responded smoothly, not missing a beat. "But maybe Miss Sullivan could share her thoughts on the new wing design while we wait. Her perspective might be valuable." Patricia let out a silvery laugh, cutting through the conversation. "James, darling, I'm sure Miss Sullivan is more interested in the canapes than the construction plans. This is rather technical after all." But Dr. Harris wasn't deterred. "Actually, Patricia, Miss Sullivan asked some remarkably insightful questions about our pediatric care protocols this morning. I'd value her input." The tension in the air was palpable, but Emma remained calm, her composed demeanor not wavering. She had no need to prove herself to these women. They would soon see her worth in a way they'd never expected. Catherine's voice carried through the crowd with practiced ease, though there was an underlying sharpness to it as she guided Emma through the ballroom. Her eyes darted around, taking note of the whispers that followed them, but she kept her smile fixed, not wanting to show any sign of discomfort. "This way," Catherine said with a thin smile, leading Emma toward a group of high-profile hospital donors. "Montgomery Wells is over there. He's made quite the contribution to the hospital, and you'll find him to be quite engaging." The subtle condescension in her tone was unmistakable, but Emma didn't flinch. As they walked, Eleanor and Patricia fell into step behind them, their conversation growing softer but no less judgmental. "I can't believe she's here," Eleanor murmured. "She has no business in this crowd. I bet she's just here for the publicity." Patricia snorted softly in agreement, her eyes scanning Emma's simple, unassuming dress. "They probably invited her just to make the gala look more diverse," she added, her words laced with disdain. Emma, however, seemed undisturbed by their whispers. She had learned long ago to ignore the judgment of others, especially those who valued status and appearance above all else. She could feel the stares and hear the gossip, but she remained focused on the reason she was there: the children. Her mind wandered to the promise she'd made to the little girl earlier that day, and she wondered if the new wing would truly provide the hope it had the potential to. They finally reached Montgomery Wells, a tall man in a sharply tailored tuxedo. His smile was wide and his handshake firm as he greeted them. "Catherine, Eleanor, Patricia, good to see you all. And you must be Miss Sullivan," he said, his gaze lingering a moment too long on Emma's plain attire before offering a cordial smile. "I've heard so much about your involvement with the hospital." Emma smiled politely, her hand firm as she shook Montgomery's. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Wells," she said, her voice calm and composed. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight." Catherine, eager to make Emma's presence seem less out of place, quickly interjected. "Monty, Miss Sullivan is quite passionate about children's health care," she said, her tone smooth but with an undercurrent of something else, perhaps an attempt to distance herself from Emma's humble appearance. "She's here to learn more about the new wing." Montgomery raised an eyebrow, the faintest trace of skepticism crossing his face before it was replaced with a polite smile. "Ah, of course," he said, glancing at Emma's simple dress. "Well, it's always wonderful to meet people who care about such important causes." Eleanor and Patricia exchanged looks, barely masking their amusement. "I'm sure it's refreshing for you, Miss Sullivan, to see how we do things here," Eleanor said with a thin smile, her voice dripping with a mix of faux sweetness and condescension. "I mean, this is the level where serious contributions are made." Emma nodded, unbothered. "I agree. Every contribution, no matter the size, is meaningful. It all adds up to make a difference in the end." Patricia smirked behind her champagne glass. "Yes, well, some contributions carry more weight than others. As you'll see tonight, the real donors are in a different league entirely." But Emma, her calm demeanor unwavering, simply returned their smiles and continued the conversation with Montgomery. She knew where she stood, and none of their barbs would distract her from the larger mission at hand, ensuring that the children who needed it most would receive the care and hope they deserved. Little did they know, the true donor of the evening was already standing among them. The evening seemed to drag on for Emma, but she remained calm, her mind focused on the purpose that had brought her here. As she mingled with Montgomery Wells and the other hospital board members, she couldn't help but feel the subtle, judgmental gazes of Catherine and her circle following her every move. They were clearly uncomfortable with her presence, and yet they couldn't quite dismiss her. Catherine, ever the social tactician, made sure to lead Emma through the crowd with an air of politeness that barely masked her condescension. She introduced Emma to a few more influential figures, including the mayor's assistant and a well-known philanthropist. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine was doing it more for show than genuine interest. As they walked past the grand buffet, Emma overheard bits of conversation. "She doesn't even look like she belongs here," one woman whispered. "Not even a designer purse or anything. Who let her in?" Emma kept her gaze straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had learned long ago that the opinions of people like these weren't worth her time. Finally, Catherine steered her toward a large, impressive display of photos and architectural drawings showcasing the new pediatric oncology wing. Montgomery, who had been talking about the project with increasing enthusiasm, suddenly turned toward Emma. "What do you think?" he asked, genuinely curious despite his earlier judgment of her appearance. "Your thoughts on the design?" Emma stepped closer to the display, studying it with care. Her eyes traced the details of the garden terrace and the wide windows that would bring in natural light, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital environment. She could almost hear the laughter of the children who would one day enjoy the space. "I think it's beautiful," she said softly. "It's a place of hope, a place for children to heal, not just physically, but emotionally too. Montgomery nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by her insight. But Catherine, sensing the shift in the conversation, quickly interjected. Yes, well, we'll be sure to make sure it's up to the standards of our donors. Her tone was colder now, laced with a thinly veiled challenge. Emma raised an eyebrow but said nothing, knowing that the evening was far from over, and that the truth of her contribution would soon come to light. As Emma stood there, quietly contemplating the plans for the new wing, she noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Catherine's attempt to regain control over the conversation was palpable, but it only made Emma more resolute in her silence. She had already made her mark, and soon enough everyone would understand the depth of her involvement, regardless of how much Catherine tried to steer things in a different direction. After a few moments of awkward silence, Dr. James Harris, who had been speaking to another group across the room, made his way over. His eyes lit up when he saw Emma, and without hesitation he walked toward her, extending his hand in greeting. "Miss Sullivan," he said warmly, "I'm so glad you're here tonight. I didn't realize you'd be joining." Catherine's eyes narrowed as she looked from Dr. Harris to Emma, her social instincts kicking in as she tried to recalibrate the situation. "You two know each other?" she asked, her voice sharp with curiosity. It was as though she couldn't fathom someone so ordinary having connections with someone of Dr. Harris's caliber. Emma nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yes, I've been spending some time with the children in the hospital. Dr. Harris has been incredibly welcoming." Dr. Harris smiled, nodding in agreement. "Miss Sullivan has been a great support to us," he said, his admiration for Emma clear in his voice. "She spent the entire morning with our pediatric ward, getting to know the kids and learning about their needs. It's rare to find someone so genuinely invested." Catherine, though trying to mask it, looked flustered. She had expected Emma to be another charity case, someone whose connection to the hospital was merely a matter of attending events. But as the conversation shifted, it became increasingly evident that Emma's presence here wasn't just for show, it was part of something far bigger. "Well, it's always lovely to meet someone so involved in the cause," Montgomery said, trying to regain the spotlight. "Perhaps we can all share ideas for the new wing later." Emma simply nodded, her thoughts already far ahead. She knew what was coming next, the moment when her true identity would be revealed, when the truth of her involvement with the hospital would shake this room to its core, and she was ready. As the evening progressed, the tension in the Hawthorne ballroom became almost palpable. Emma could feel the subtle shift in the air. She wasn't just a guest at this event anymore. The whispers had gone from mocking comments to more curious murmurs. Catherine and her circle were watching her closely, trying to figure out what exactly she was doing here and why she wasn't behaving like the others. Emma moved through the crowd with quiet composure, her eyes occasionally meeting the curious gazes of those around her. She could sense the rising discomfort among the elites as they tried to reconcile their judgment of her with her calm confidence. As the night wore on, she found herself gravitating toward the back of the ballroom, away from the crowded groups of donors. The chatter about the new hospital wing filled the air, but Emma's thoughts were elsewhere, on the children she'd met earlier, on the promise she'd made, and on the moment that was fast approaching. From across the room, Emma saw Catherine once again conspiring with Eleanor and Patricia. Their whispers were deliberate, yet not quite subtle enough to hide their disdain. Catherine's eyes occasionally flicked in Emma's direction, narrowing with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She couldn't seem to shake the feeling that there was more to this woman than met the eye. Just then, the event's master of ceremonies took to the stage, drawing everyone's attention. His voice echoed through the ballroom, signaling the start of the major donor reveal, a moment Catherine had been eagerly awaiting. Emma glanced toward the stage but didn't move. She knew what was coming. The time for the truth was almost at hand. As the crowd shifted toward the stage, Emma stayed behind, watching the scene unfold, knowing that the very moment everyone had been waiting for would soon make the truth about her and her generosity impossible to ignore. The spotlight shone brightly on the stage as Richard Thornton, the hospital's executive director, stepped forward to announce the night's most anticipated moment. The chatter among the guests hushed, and the energy in the room shifted from social pleasantries to eager anticipation. Emma remained near the back, watching the crowd's shifting dynamics, her heart steady but her mind focused on the inevitable reveal. "Good evening, everyone," Richard's voice boomed, his tone rich with practiced gravitas. "Tonight marks a historic chapter for Boston Children's Hospital. We're here to celebrate the generosity that will help shape the future of pediatric care for years to come." His words were met with polite applause, but Emma could sense the undertone of competition in the room, as if everyone was already mentally calculating their place in the hierarchy of donors. Richard continued, "Before we reveal the names of our major donors, I want to take a moment to share something extraordinary. For the first time in our hospital's 150-year history, we have received an anonymous donation that has left the entire board speechless." Murmurs rippled through the room, and Emma could almost feel the collective curiosity building. She didn't need to look at anyone to know the questions swirling in their minds. Who was this mysterious donor? "As much as we respect the privacy of our anonymous benefactor," Richard continued, "this individual has graciously given us permission to acknowledge them tonight. They are here with us in this very room." The room fell into a heavy silence, the murmurs giving way to an electric buzz of uncertainty. Catherine stiffened at her seat, glancing around nervously. She shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the idea that someone could make such a significant contribution without the customary fanfare that accompanied such large donations. Richard's gaze swept across the room, then landed directly on Emma. "I would like to invite Miss Sullivan to join me on stage." The crowd went still. Whispers of disbelief flickered through the room. Catherine's glass froze halfway to her lips. "There must be another Sullivan," she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling ever so slightly. But Emma, calm and composed, rose from her seat. Her simple beige dress parted the sea of opulent gowns as she made her way toward the stage, her steps confident, each one deliberate. The whispers continued, louder now, but Emma paid them no mind. She had a promise to fulfill. As Emma stepped onto the stage, the room fell into an uneasy silence, a ripple of confusion sweeping through the crowd. The chandelier lights gleamed off the polished marble floors, casting soft shadows across the space. All eyes were on her, but not with the same respect that had been given to the other high-profile guests. No, this was different. These were eyes filled with disbelief, curiosity, and the slow realization that something far more significant was unfolding than they had initially understood. Richard Thornton's voice broke the silence, warm but with an underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce Miss Emma Sullivan." His words were met with a wave of murmurs, the guests still unsure of what they were witnessing. Emma took a moment to glance over the crowd, her gaze steady and unwavering. Her presence, though humble in appearance, was commanding in its quiet power. She moved gracefully to the microphone, standing tall in her unadorned beige dress, a dress that now seemed to glow in the spotlight, not because of its design or cost, but because of the woman wearing it. The room had expected another donor, another name to add to the prestigious list. But Emma Sullivan was not just any donor. "Good evening," Emma began, her voice steady but soft, filling the silence in a way that held everyone's attention. "I'm honored to be here tonight, and I want to thank you all for your dedication to children's health care. I believe that every child deserves the best care, regardless of their family circumstances." As she spoke, the murmurs grew louder, though it was less about the cause now and more about who she was. Emma could feel the weight of their gaze, but it didn't faze her. She had made it to this moment, and she was determined to speak her truth. Her eyes swept across the crowd, landing briefly on Catherine, who was still frozen in her seat, a glass of champagne half raised in her hand. The shock on her face was unmistakable. Emma smiled inwardly, but kept her expression neutral. This was the moment of reckoning, not just for Catherine, but for everyone in this room. Emma paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in the air. She could see the confusion on the faces of the crowd, the realization starting to creep in. Somewhere they were beginning to connect the dots. The whispers in the room became louder, though no one dared to speak directly. Emma knew what they were all thinking. Who was she really? "As some of you may know, I spent much of my childhood in this very hospital," Emma continued, her voice softening, a personal edge creeping in. "I was one of the many children who needed help, help that I couldn't have received without the generosity of donors and the kindness of the staff here. Without this place, I wouldn't be standing before you today. The room was completely still now, the murmurs turning into silence as if they were holding their collective breath, waiting for her to continue. Over the years, Emma went on, I've had the privilege of using my resources to give back to the cause that saved me. But tonight, I'm not here for recognition. I'm here for the children. Her eyes scanned the crowd again, and this time, her gaze lingered longer on Catherine, whose shock was slowly turning into something else. Embarrassment, perhaps, or regret. Emma continued, the donation I'm making tonight is for the new pediatric oncology wing. It's a contribution I hope will make a real difference in the lives of children fighting for their lives. But this is not just my gift. It's the gift of everyone who believes that no child should have to fight alone. Catherine's face paled, and she set her champagne glass down with a shaking hand. Emma noticed the shift in her, but she didn't let it distract her. She had more to say, and this was the moment to say it. In fact, Emma said with a quiet, resolute tone, I've donated $25 million to fund this wing, and it will forever be known as Sophie's Butterfly Haven, named after one of the children who inspired me to make this gift. The room was now completely silent. Shock. Disbelief. Catherine and her circle were staring, mouths agape. The true extent of Emma's contribution was out in the open now, and the scales had fallen from their eyes. What they had dismissed moments ago as a simple, poor woman in a plain dress had just turned the entire evening on its head. For Emma, the weight of her contribution was not in the money. It was in the lives it would touch, the hope it would give, and the undeniable statement that sometimes the most important things can't be seen with the eye. And as she stood there, feeling the gaze of the room shift, the room was still, a heavy silence hanging in the air after Emma's revelation. Her words echoed in the minds of the crowd, and the full weight of her $25 million donation seemed to sink in slowly. Catherine, Eleanor, and Patricia were motionless, their faces pale as they processed what had just happened. It was as if the world had shifted under their feet, leaving them grasping for an explanation they couldn't quite find. The once vibrant chatter of the gala had been replaced by a quiet buzz of disbelief. The guests exchanged nervous glances, some stepping back, unsure how to react. The whispers that had once followed Emma now swirled around her, but they were different, tentative, unsure, and full of awe rather than judgment. Emma stood on stage, her expression calm but unwavering, as the realization hit her that this was only the beginning. This wasn't just about the money, it was about sending a message. She had given more than just a donation. She had given a piece of herself, a part of her history, to a cause she believed in deeply. Richard Thornton, still standing at her side, watched the room with a measured gaze, his lips slightly parted in surprise. He had known about Emma's donation, of course, but the way the crowd was reacting was beyond even his expectations. The shift in power was palpable. In the space of a few moments, Emma had gone from being an invisible guest in a plain dress to the focal point of the entire event. Montgomery Wells, who had been silently observing from the back of the room, finally spoke. I didn't know, he said, his voice tinged with admiration. This is incredible. He turned to Emma, his tone more respectful now. Thank you for your generosity. You've just changed everything. Emma nodded, her gaze sweeping the room once more. She had done more than simply make a donation. She had made a statement. The room remained still, the shift in the atmosphere undeniable. Emma's quiet composure stood in stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts swirling around her. As Montgomery's words hung in the air, she could feel the collective gaze of the crowd pressing in. But it wasn't the judgment she had felt earlier. It was curiosity, respect, and a dawning realization that the woman standing before them was someone they had utterly misjudged. Catherine, still frozen in her seat, looked as though she had just been struck by a wave of cold water. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed it just as quickly, her mind racing to catch up with the situation unfolding before her. The realization that Emma was not just a guest in an ill-fitting dress, but a legendary figure in philanthropy, was too much to process in the blink of an eye. Eleanor and Patricia, too, were caught in their own web of embarrassment. They exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier smirks now replaced by uncertainty. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating, as they tried to reconcile the woman they had so easily dismissed with the powerful force standing on the stage. Emma finally stepped away from the microphone, letting the room settle before she spoke again. "I don't expect any applause," she said gently, her voice strong yet humble. "What I want is for us all to remember that the real power is in the lives we change, the children we help. It's not about recognition or praise. It's about the difference we can make when we work together." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time that night, the crowd seemed to understand. The women in the room, those who had seen wealth as a symbol of worth, those who had dismissed Emma as just another charity case, were now faced with the truth of what real impact looked like. The silence that followed Emma's statement was not one of awkwardness, but reflection. Slowly, the guests began to shift, murmuring among themselves, processing the depth of what they had just witnessed. It was clear now, Emma had just changed the narrative of the evening, and perhaps even the course of their own futures. What they would take from this moment, no one could say for sure, but one thing was certain. They would never view her, or anyone else, the same way again. The evening had shifted in tone, and as the gala continued, Emma noticed the change in the room. What had been an evening of superficial judgments and casual cruelty had slowly transformed into something more introspective. The whispers had faded, replaced by murmurs of admiration, awe, and a sense of deep reflection. Emma's presence on that stage, so quiet and unassuming, had shattered the walls of judgment that many had built up around themselves. Catherine, who had once led the charge in dismissing Emma, now stood in the middle of a room she no longer seemed to fit. Her mind raced as she tried to digest everything that had just unfolded. How had she been so blind? The woman she had looked down upon for her modest dress, the woman she had whispered about with her friends, was not only an incredibly wealthy philanthropist, but she was also someone who had chosen to remain humble and hidden in plain sight. The contrast between Catherine's discomfort and Emma's poise couldn't have been clearer. Catherine found herself shifting uncomfortably as she glanced around, noticing how the other guests were starting to gravitate toward Emma, their expressions no longer dismissive, but filled with admiration. They were drawn to Emma's authenticity, to the quiet strength that had so evidently overshadowed the sparkling pretenses around them. Eleanor and Patricia, too, found themselves awkwardly positioned. They were still processing the revelation, their earlier remarks and judgments lingering in the air between them. Their discomfort was palpable, and Emma could see it in their eyes, how they were forced to confront their own biases and assumptions. They, too, had misjudged her, and now they could do nothing but watch as the narrative shifted entirely. But it wasn't just the women who had been forced to reckon with their actions. The men in the room, too, were silently evaluating their own assumptions. Montgomery Wells, once so eager to appear gracious, now stood with a new respect for Emma. His earlier words about her contribution were sincere, but they carried a weight of realization. He had underestimated her, and now he understood just how deeply he had done so. Emma, meanwhile, was not affected by the change in atmosphere. She had never sought approval or validation. Her focus was on what really mattered: the children, the hospital, and the future of pediatric care. This was her victory, not in the attention she had garnered, but in knowing that her contribution was about to make a difference in so many young lives. As the evening wore on, Emma could feel the shift taking place within herself as well. She had come to this event with a clear purpose, and now that purpose was unfolding in ways she had never imagined. This was more than just about money. It was about the realization that when people set aside their prejudices and open their eyes to what truly matters, real change could happen. The evening was far from over, but for Emma, the night had already become a success. Little did she know the biggest lesson of all was just about to begin. As the night continued, the room buzzed with a new energy, a palpable shift in tone as more guests sought out Emma, eager to learn more about her and her foundation. The socialites who had once dismissed her were now fawning over her with practiced smiles, their earlier condescension masked by overly enthusiastic politeness. Emma, however, didn't let their sudden interest sway her. She was polite, but distant, her heart and mind still focused on the real reason she was there, to bring hope to those who needed it most. Catherine, still reeling from the shock, found herself standing alone, her mind tangled with confusion and guilt. The whispers from earlier, the assumptions she had made, played back in her head like a haunting refrain. How had she been so wrong about Emma? The woman she had dismissed as nothing more than a department store secretary was, in fact, a woman whose quiet generosity would forever change the future of pediatric care at the hospital. Catherine, a voice broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Dr. Harris approaching. His face was kind, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor as he studied her. I just wanted to thank you again for your continued support of the hospital. Your efforts do not go unnoticed. Catherine forced a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. Of course, Dr. Harris, she replied, her voice tight, but I can't stop thinking about Emma. I never realized who she really was. Dr. Harris's expression softened, understanding her turmoil. I'm sure she never wanted you to know, but now you do. And what you do with that knowledge, well, that's what will matter going forward. The words stung, but they also gave Catherine pause. She had spent so many years building her life around status, appearances, and connections. She had built walls around herself to protect her from the ordinary people she deemed unworthy of her time. But Emma had shown her just how wrong she was. It was as if a crack had appeared in the walls of Catherine's carefully constructed world. Meanwhile, Emma continued to speak with other guests, but her focus was still sharp. She didn't need their admiration or validation. What mattered now was ensuring the new wing at the hospital was built with the care and attention it deserved. She had promised those children and herself that she would make a difference. As the evening wore on, Emma could feel her resolve strengthening. The path she was on had only just begun, and she was ready to walk it, regardless of the walls others had built around themselves. Catherine stood at the edge of the ballroom, her eyes darting between the remaining guests, but her mind was elsewhere, still grappling with the events of the evening. Emma Sullivan's revelation had shaken her to her core, and no amount of sparkling chandeliers or distant chatter could drown out the echo of her own mistakes. She had spent so many years judging people based on appearances, on labels, on wealth, and tonight she had been confronted with the harsh truth that she had been wrong all along. Catherine's gaze lingered on Emma, who was still surrounded by an ever-growing circle of admirers. The once ordinary woman in the simple beige dress was now the center of attention, and the others, Catherine, Eleanor, and Patricia, were left on the outskirts, forced to reckon with the consequences of their earlier behavior. Catherine could feel the weight of their earlier judgment on her chest, a sense of shame slowly replacing the anger she had initially felt. As much as she wanted to walk over to Emma and apologize, she didn't know where to begin. How could she explain the years of ingrained bias that had shaped her actions? How could she undo the hurtful things she had said and done? The truth was, she wasn't sure she could. But one thing was clear. Her perspective had changed. This wasn't just about a donation. It wasn't just about money. It was about something far deeper, something Catherine had been blind to for so long. Emma wasn't just a philanthropist with a checkbook. She was a woman who had experienced real hardship, real loss, and had chosen to use her wealth for something far greater than her own benefit. It was a concept Catherine couldn't have truly understood before tonight, and now that she did, she knew she had to do better. The crowd was thinning out, but Catherine didn't move. She stood there, her mind racing, trying to decide what to do next. Catherine's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice beside her. You look like you're deep in thought. She turned to see Dr. Harris, who had quietly approached her. His expression was gentle, but there was an undeniable sharpness in his eyes, an awareness of the transformation taking place within her. He had been watching her since the moment Emma stepped on stage, and now he could sense the shift in Catherine. Dr. Harris, Catherine said, her voice tight, betraying the discomfort she felt. I don't know how to even begin to process everything. I've spent my life building walls around myself, surrounding myself with the right people, the right labels. And then, Emma. She's made me realize just how much I've been missing. Dr. Harris smiled faintly, the wisdom in his eyes evident. It's not easy, is it, to admit that we've been wrong about something so fundamental. But what matters now is what you choose to do with that knowledge. The world isn't about the labels or the money. It's about what you do with the opportunities you've been given. Emma's actions, her generosity, have shown us all a different way. Catherine nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had spent so long living in a world defined by status and social standing, but Emma had thrown that all into sharp contrast. It wasn't just the magnitude of her donation, it was the way Emma had chosen to live. Humble, unassuming, and driven by a desire to help others. Catherine suddenly felt the weight of her past actions, her casual dismissals of those she considered beneath her. She had looked down on people like Emma, convinced that they had nothing to offer. "I've been so focused on the wrong things," Catherine admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe it's time to change that." Dr. Harris regarded her for a long moment, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's never too late to change, Catherine, and it starts with recognizing what truly matters." For the first time in a long while, Catherine felt a flicker of hope, a spark that she hadn't felt in years. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but the first step had been taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would lead her to a better version of herself, one that valued people for who they truly were, not for what they had. Catherine sat in the quiet of her office the next morning, the soft hum of the city outside doing little to drown out the thoughts swirling in her mind. The gala had ended hours ago, but the weight of the night's events still clung to her, heavier than she had anticipated. She couldn't shake the image of Emma standing on that stage, speaking with quiet power, while she, Catherine, had felt small in her presence. The pride she had once felt about her wealth, her connections, and her social status seemed so trivial now. Her fingers drummed restlessly on the desk, a rhythm that matched the turmoil inside her. She had always believed that success was measured by who you knew and what you owned. Yet in a matter of hours, her entire worldview had been upended. Emma had shown her that there was a different kind of success, the kind that was rooted in humility, empathy, and making a real impact. Catherine had spent decades building her empire, but in doing so, she had unknowingly built walls around herself. She had insulated herself from people who didn't fit her idea of what was worthy of her time, but Emma had cracked that wall wide open. Catherine had seen firsthand how someone who lived quietly, without the fanfare, without the spotlight, could change the world in ways that no amount of money or connections could. Emma's simplicity had done more than any designer gown or well-crafted speech could. With a sigh, Catherine leaned back in her chair, eyes closing briefly as she tried to gather her thoughts. She couldn't undo the past, but she had a chance to do something different now. She had a chance to change, not just her view of the world, but how she interacted with it. The question was, where to begin? The answer seemed simple, though daunting. She needed to start by stepping away from the comfortable world she had spent years inhabiting. It was time to find a new way of contributing, of giving back. Not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Emma had led by example, and it was time for Catherine to follow. Catherine's thoughts turned to the hospital, to the pediatric wing that Emma had funded so generously. She realized that she could no longer stand on the sidelines, passively watching others make a difference. She had the resources, the connections, and the influence, everything she needed to truly make a change. But Emma's example had taught her that true impact came from the heart, not from the status attached to a donation or a well-placed speech. It had to be about the people. A surge of determination swept through her as she picked up her phone. She couldn't waste time second-guessing herself. She needed to act. First, she dialed the number for the hospital's board of directors, her fingers trembling slightly. When the call connected, she didn't hesitate. "This is Catherine Winters. I need to speak with Richard Thornton. It's urgent," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil that had taken root inside her. She knew this call would be the first step in a long journey, one that would require more than just writing checks. She would need to roll up her sleeves and get involved in ways she never had before. As she waited for Richard to pick up, Catherine felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't about the gala or about social status. It was about real change, real people, and the kind of legacy she wanted to leave behind. When Richard's voice finally came through the line, Catherine wasted no time. Richard, I've been thinking about the pediatric wing, and I've made a decision. I want to be directly involved in the hospital's future initiatives. I don't just want to donate money anymore. I want to contribute time, expertise, and support. It's time I made a real impact. Richard, who had witnessed Catherine's transformation at the gala, could hear the sincerity in her voice. I'm glad to hear that, Catherine. Your involvement could make a huge difference. Let's discuss the next steps. As Catherine ended the call, she felt a new sense of purpose settle in her chest. The road ahead would be long, and the changes she needed to make within herself wouldn't come easily. But one thing was certain. She was ready to walk it. Emma had shown her the way, and now it was time for Catherine to take her first steps toward a new chapter. Catherine walked through the hospital's newly designed pediatric wing, her footsteps echoing softly in the hallways. The walls were lined with vibrant murals, each one a splash of color meant to bring comfort and joy to the children who would spend their days here. The space was light, open, and full of hope. Everything she had once believed a hospital could never be. It was a far cry from the sterile, cold environments she had always associated with healthcare. As Catherine continued down the hallway, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in her chest. This was no longer just about writing checks or attending galas. She had chosen to be involved, truly involved, and it had been transformative. She had spent the last few months working alongside Emma and the hospital staff, offering her expertise where she could and listening to the needs of the families who would benefit from this new wing. The work had opened her eyes in ways she hadn't anticipated. She found herself spending more time in the pediatric oncology ward, talking with doctors, nurses, and parents. She had even begun helping organize family support groups for those going through treatments. The socialite who had once dismissed these efforts as too much work had become someone entirely different. Now every moment spent here felt like a step toward redemption, a chance to rebuild the kind of life she could be proud of. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Emma. Meet me at the new garden terrace in 30. We need to discuss the next phase. Catherine smiled, her heart lifting at the thought of continuing their work together. It wasn't just about the donation anymore. It was about the lives they were changing and the future they were helping to build. She quickly typed her reply. Be there soon. Catherine made her way to the garden terrace, her mind racing with the project still in motion and the changes she had seen in herself. The space Emma had envisioned was coming together beautifully. It was more than just a garden. It was a sanctuary, a place where children could experience peace and comfort, even in the hardest of times. She couldn't help but think back to her earlier days at the hospital, when she had viewed such initiatives as mere decorative efforts. Now she saw them for what they truly were, life-changing, soul-soothing contributions. When Catherine arrived, Emma was already there, standing near a set of chairs surrounded by lush greenery. The garden had been designed with care. Every element had been chosen to make the space accessible, from wheelchair-friendly pathways to the colorful butterflies fluttering near the flowers. It was a place for children to forget, if only for a moment, the battles they were facing. Catherine, I'm glad you made it, Emma said with a warm smile, her voice calm and collected, as always. I wanted to show you how far we've come. Catherine nodded, her eyes taking in the serene atmosphere. It's incredible, she said softly. I never imagined that a garden could mean so much. It's more than just a place to sit. It's a space that breathes life into the work we've been doing. Emma smiled. Exactly. This garden is a reminder that healing isn't just physical. It's emotional too. And we've worked so hard to create a place that reminds these kids of hope. Catherine was quiet for a moment, taking in the beauty around them. The sound of children's laughter in the distance reminded her of how far they had come and how much more they could do together. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was truly making a difference. This wasn't just about charity, it was about life, about making sure every child, no matter their background or status, was given the same opportunities. I think we're just getting started, Emma, Catherine said, her voice steady. There's so much more we can do. Emma looked at her with a knowing smile. her eyes filled with quiet conviction. I agree, and we're going to do it. Together. The grand opening of the new pediatric oncology wing was finally here. The space had been months in the making, and the sense of anticipation in the air was palpable. Catherine stood near the entrance, watching as families, staff, and dignitaries gathered for the ceremony. The garden terrace, Sophie's butterfly haven, gleamed in the afternoon sun, the colorful flowers in full bloom and butterflies fluttering from petal to petal, just as Emma had envisioned. Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She had come so far since that night at the gala, when Emma's simple gesture had turned her world upside down. She had found herself not only donating money, but becoming deeply involved in the lives of the families who would benefit from the new wing. Her work had opened her eyes to the importance of true generosity, of giving not just resources, but time and heart. She no longer saw her wealth as a tool for personal gain, but as a means to create lasting change. Emma walked up beside her calm presence as reassuring as ever. "It's beautiful," Catherine said, her voice full of emotion. "I never thought I would find myself here doing this. But now, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Emma smiled softly, her eyes bright with pride. "You've come a long way, Catherine, and so have we. This is just the beginning." Her gaze swept across the space, settling on the children who were running through the garden, their laughter ringing through the air. It was everything they had worked for, a place of healing, of hope, and of new beginnings. The hospital wing was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, one that would continue to grow and touch countless lives for years to come. "It really is just the beginning, isn't it?" Catherine replied, her voice filled with resolve. "We've got so much more to do." Emma nodded, turning her gaze toward the crowd gathering at the podium. The mayor was about to speak, and Catherine could sense the excitement building in the air. This was a pivotal moment not just for the hospital, but for them both. Together, they had created something extraordinary, and they weren't done yet. The future held endless possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, Catherine was ready to face it with a clear heart and an open mind. As the mayor took the stage, the crowd hushed in anticipation, the weight of the moment settling over everyone in the room. He began with a few words of gratitude, acknowledging the incredible contributions that had made the new wing possible. Catherine and Emma stood off to the side, watching the crowd, their expressions a mix of pride and quiet satisfaction. This was the culmination of everything they had worked toward. The hospital was now officially equipped to provide cutting-edge treatment to children who needed it most. And Sophie's Butterfly Haven was more than just a garden. It was a symbol of transformation. The mayor's voice echoed through the microphone as he spoke of the impact of the new wing. But for Catherine, the true significance lay in the people who would walk through its doors in the months and years to come. She glanced at the children running through the garden, their faces alight with joy, their laughter filling the air. These were the true beneficiaries, the ones who would thrive because of their efforts. As the ceremony continued, Emma leaned toward Catherine. "We did this," she said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "Together?" Catherine smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "Yes, we did. And there's so much more we can do. This is just the beginning, Emma." Emma's smile matched hers, but there was something deeper in her gaze, a shared understanding between them. They had started with a vision of what could be, and now that vision was alive. But they both knew the work wasn't finished. There were still countless children to help, families to support, and futures to shape. As the crowd began to disperse, Catherine and Emma stood side by side, watching as the new wing and the garden filled with families and patients, their faces filled with hope. In that moment, Catherine realized that the true gift wasn't in the money, the recognition, or the status. It was in the connections, the lives touched, and the shared commitment to making the world a better place. It was a legacy, built not on wealth, but on love, compassion, and the willingness to change. And for the first time in her life, Catherine knew she had found her true purpose.